Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the ideal list of Stravinsky ballets. All of them, at least all of them that were written as ballets, because as I'm sure some of you may know, many of his works were danced. For example, the Violin Concerto, it was danced, even though he did not intend it as a ballet. But we're talking about the ballets that were written as ballets, with one little tiny exception. And that exception is the Circus Polka, which is a less than 4-minute little jeu d'esprit written for an elephant. And it's, of course, delightful, and you can get it as a filler in any number of Stravinsky discs. And if you think I'm going to listen to 14 or 15 or 20 or 24 or performances of it just to see which one is the best, you're wrong. Life is way too short. If you want the Circus Polka, go get the Circus Polka. Otherwise, we have 11 very substantial ballets. And I really have to say, these 11 ballets really ought to be considered as a unit, in the sense that they represent as important and distinguished and as, in some respects, profound body of work as any symphonic cycle of the Romantic or modern period. And if you would say, oh, well, some guy wrote 11 symphonies and they're masterpieces and, they're fabulous and blah, blah, we would think that composer was one of the greatest and most important composers in the entire universe. Well, Stravinsky was one of the greatest and most important composers in the entire universe, and he expressed that significance in many different media, but one of them was the ballet, and he gave it as much attention and significance artistically and aesthetically as any cycle of symphonies out there, period. I'm going to be dogmatic about that because I really believe that that's true. They are extraordinary works, as you know, some of the most important in the 20th century. And the later ones are no less fine than the earlier ones, even if they're less popular. So I want to take them more or less chronologically. And as with all these talks about the ideal, whatever they are, the idea is to come up with a list that has no weak links. These are not necessarily my favorites, but some of them are, some of them aren't. There are no repeated conductors. We have 11 works with 11 different conductors. And I think the point here is to simply come up with a uniformly strong grouping. Now, because Stravinsky ballets tend to get coupled on discs in clumps, there's going to be a lot of duplication anyway. If you're buying, downloads, you can get one of each things. But if you're buying physical product, you're going to have duplicate ballets. It's completely unavoidable. And so you just don't worry about that. You wind up having some extra things. These are all wonderful discs, complete discs that you'll find an enormous amount of pleasure comparing these performances and listening to the small details, because, it's really very interesting. Stravinsky had this, theory, right, that music shouldn't be interpreted. It should just be played. It's purely music. It doesn't mean anything. It's blah, blah, neoclassical, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Lots of aesthetic theory. But the reality is that the music is just as interesting as anything anyone else wrote. Some of it is deeply moving. Some of it is supposed to be lighter and simply jolly or whatever. All of it is rhythmically fabulous and texturally fascinating and full of marvelous, amazing sounds that nobody but Stravinsky could have conceived. And let's just get moving. We start with the Firebird. And my recommendation for the Firebird, and this was also in my talk about the Firebird, was Dochnani in the Vienna Philharmonic. This is on Australian eloquence. It is astounding. It's just astounding. It's an amazing, amazing Firebird. And you get the offstage trumpets at the end that you so seldom hear. They only play one note. Several times they repeat it. They go, wah, 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 while everyone else is doing da, 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 bomb, da, but they're there. And it's just so exciting, this performance. It's amazing the way Dochnani gets the Vienna Philharmonic, which can be quite schlampery and syrupy, to play Stravinsky-like, sharp, hard, edgy, exciting, accented. It's just wonderful. And with that typically burnished, natural Viennese sonority, the result is it's incomparable. It really is. It's extraordinary. So that's my recommendation for the Firebird. Then comes Petrushka. Now, there are a bazillion really good Petrushkas. You can get the original version. You can get the revised version. I don't particularly care which. Some people have strong feelings about them. That's fine. Let them feel strongly. I think they're both wonderful, and I generally want to hear just color and rhythm and an ending that isn't a letdown, because the ending kind of is a letdown. And when I said that before in my talk on Petrushka, I got a bunch of people saying, no, it's perfect, it's wonderful, it's terrific. Well, theatrically, it's appropriate. That's not the point. Musically, it's kind of a letdown. I mean, you have a dead puppet. And then, there's the whole thing with dropping the tambourine properly and stuff like that. But the one I chose, just because I come back to it so often and just love it, is Seiji Ozawa with the Boston Symphony on RCA. It was the young Seiji Ozawa, the great Boston Symphony, which was the world's greatest French orchestra at the time, and absolutely fantastic in this music. They were born to play it. And the piano solo is played by none other than Michael Tilson Thomas, the young Michael Tilson Thomas, which I think is just so cool. I think it's marvelously cool. There's another one. I think was it one where like Martha Argerich played it, or somebody famous played the piano. But this is such a great Petrushka. It's incisive and brilliant, and everybody, it's youthful. I mean, Ozawa was young. It's so fresh sounding. Everything about it sounds new and picture postcard fairy tale-ish, which is how the music's got to go. So I just love this thing, and I keep coming back to it, and it's definitely one of my favorites. But there are probably a dozen Petrushkas that can be your favorites, because you have to work to ruin it. And it's not that people haven't. They've done their best to ruin it, but generally speaking, it's done really well on disc, and this is one of the great ones. And after Petrushka comes Le Sacre du Printemps, the Rite of Spring. And again, many, many fine performances. You can choose the one that suits your mood. You can have the sacrificial virgin when you are happy, the sacrificial virgin when you are virgin when you are sad, the fight with the stegosaurus. I mean, the music has become such a part of our culture, of our musical consciousness. It's really funny. I mean, did you ever think the day would come when there would be like, the Rite of Spring for every mood? Weddings, bar mitzvahs, funerals, confirmations, who knows? Anyway, Boulez in Cleveland. This is, again, Boulez remade this with Cleveland, and it's not as good. And it's not as transparently recorded, which is the important thing in this piece, because it's so thick and so heavy, and the textures are so dense. You want to hear what's going on in the music. This one is a little faster, a little more exciting, a little more incisive. It's wonderfully well recorded, and it really showed Boulez off at his very, very best. It's not the ultimate in savagery. It is really the ultimate in some ways in just, rhythmic accuracy and precision and clarity. And I just love this performance. It sounds so right as it's going. And that's what you really want with this piece. It should sound like it's playing itself. It should not sound like the orchestra is working or counting out loud when they're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't want that. You want it to just sound like it's erupting spontaneously. And believe it or not, Boulez, who was the least spontaneous human being in the universe, gets that here. He really does. It just goes. Marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. Then after the Rite of Spring came Les Noces, the Wedding, a choral ballet in 4 tableaux. Really, possibly, you hate to say it, but it may be the greatest masterpiece among all the ballets. It very well could be. It is the essence of that distilled folk melos that Stravinsky was working with. The roots in Russian folk music, which is completely reinterpreted and boiled down to, stripped down to its rhythmic essence when, just in terms of physicality and movement. And it's just an extraordinary piece. And my choice is the Ancherl Czech Philharmonic. Boy, is this a knockout of a performance. The scoring is just 4 pianos and percussion, and you need to have a great chorus, one that can actually sing in a sort of Slavic-y, tangy, Slavic-like, tangy manner. And most importantly, again, it's all about the rhythm, about the movement, about feeling the earthiness of it, and relishing the text and the Russian syllables, the liquid vowels and the nice crunchy consonants. Russian actually is such a gorgeous language when it's sung well. It really is. And this is just a marvelous performance of it. So Carl Ancherl on Superfon for Les Noces. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And after that, everything changed. Stravinsky became a neoclassicist. I mean, boy, oh boy, was that a stylistic revolution. And he became a neoclassicist with Pulcinella. And Pulcinella is a ballet with songs theoretically based on what Stravinsky thought was Pergolesi. And some of it was, but most of it was Domenico Gallo, Gallo. And there is a separate talk about Domenico Gallo's trio sonatas, which were the source of Pulcinella. And the recording that I used in that talk is on YouTube. It's a CPO recording of the Domenico Gallo trio sonatas. And I really urge you to listen to them, because the fascinating thing about Stravinsky's treatment of this earlier music is that he did so little with it. And the tiny changes that he made, they're little changes in rhythm. I mean, the orchestra is a little bigger, changes in texture, changes in the spacing of chords. All of those things made the music sound modern. But when you listen to the original, you find that it sounds incredibly like you recognize it immediately. It's not like he had to do a lot. It's really cool. You may also have seen my video on Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphosis of Themes by Weber, where I play the Weber originals next to the Hindemith versions. It's the same thing. So little had to be done to make the music sound so updated. It's really just an incredible listening exercise if you have some time. It's endlessly fascinating. But let's talk about Pulcinella's. Again, it's been rather lucky on disc, but I actually just did a video of the big LSO Abbado box where I talked about this performance, because the great Pulcinella is Abbado with the London Symphony Orchestra. It has the best singers. It has this warm, sunny Italian lyricism that really works beautifully with Stravinsky's own incisive, somewhat, the brittle neoclassicism of his treatment of these early melodies. And my God, it's a beautiful performance. It's absolutely fabulous. It's played to a fairly well, marvelously recorded. I do like the suite very much. I love the suite, but I also really love the complete ballet with the vocal parts, with the songs included. I just think it's a wonderfully integrated and beautiful piece. And this, Abbado and the LSO, is the version to get. Then, after Pulcinella, Stravinsky became even more neoclassical, but not neoclassical in a borrowy sense. He actually sort of invented his own stuff after that. Stravinsky was one of those composers. He needed models. He needed to work from a model, and then he would make it his own. And so the model in this particular case was French Baroque music, and the ballet was Apollo, or it's an original title, Apollon Musaget, but, Apollo, the Muses, or whatever it was. But it later became Apollo when he revised it. There's not much difference between the two. And my choice for Apollo is it here? Yes, this is the original Apollon Musaget, Chailly with the Concertgebouw. Now, Chailly's Stravinsky is phenomenal. And it's all going to get boxed up and released soon. By the time you see this, maybe it will have been. Or, if it's the year 2375 when you're watching this, it probably was deleted about a century and a half ago. But Chailly's Stravinsky was superb, really superb. I mean, a classic Petrushka and Rite of Spring from Cleveland too, like Boulez, just dynamite. It's the Boulez version, only with the savagery that Boulez doesn't go for in the same way. And then he wound up at the Concertgebouw. He did all kinds of Stravinsky stuff. It's all fantastic. And this Apollo is gorgeous. The one Apollo not to get is Carillons, because while the string playing is gorgeous, it is the most thick, buttery, oleaginous. That's the word. Oleaginous, as in margarine, like greasy textured. Absolutely wrong. So, Chailly in the Concertgebouw is the way to go for Apollo. But again, there are many, many fine Apollos because, Stravinsky's neoclassical period from then on really does not ask for much interpretation. Chailly, for example, he didn't do the complete Firebird. He only did the suite. Because the Firebird is problematic. It's romantic. It has dead spots. But these pieces don't. I mean, they're designed essentially to play themselves if you do what Stravinsky wrote. And of course, if the interpreter is a genius and the musicians are fabulous, and on top of it, there's always a question of how much of what he wrote actually makes it into the recording, which is another way of saying everything is interpreted, always. There is always an interpretive identity behind it. However cold and self-sufficient and inexpressive the composer claimed his music was, it all has to be played by human beings, and no two human beings agree on what a sforzando means or exactly how to hit a rhythm. And so we have interpretations which put a different slant on what the music expresses, even if it's supposed to express nothing other than itself. So Chailly is particularly good at the itselfness of Stravinsky's Apollo, whatever that means. And then next, after the itselfness of Apollo, Stravinsky decided to Baudelarize Tchaikovsky and do The Fairy's Kiss. This is a big ballet. This is really his longest ballet. After the Firebird. And it's wonderful. It's all based on like Tchaikovsky piano music. It's not like based on the Fourth Symphony or Romeo and Juliet. Don't go running around looking for the Tchaikovsky bits that Stravinsky used unless you really know your Tchaikovsky extremely well, your offbeat Tchaikovsky. Because Stravinsky, the irony, of course, is that Stravinsky's whole aesthetic could not have been more opposed to Tchaikovsky's, and Stravinsky adored Tchaikovsky. Absolutely worshipped the man. And The Fairy's Kiss is a wonderful, loving homage to Tchaikovsky. And it sounds totally like Stravinsky. It's just marvelous. And this performance I was waving around here, this is incredible. This is Oliver Knussen with the Cleveland Orchestra on Deutsche Grammophon. This is just the best one. Hands down, the best one. You can also get the Divertimento from The Fairy's Kiss, which it's about, like about half the complete ballet, maybe a little more. It's really, that's a very fine piece too. But I like the complete ballet because it doesn't have any dead spots really. It's all a joy to listen to. And it's great to hear these beautiful tunes being played with that slightly dry, acerbic quality that Stravinsky gave them. It's a wonderful meeting of minds between two great composers. So for The Fairy's Kiss, Knussen on DG, if it's still around, if you can find it. Otherwise, there are plenty of other ones that are quite good also. See, one of the nice things about Stravinsky is that there are tons of great recordings to choose from. It's like Beethoven symphonies. They've just been done well for many years by just about everybody who was serious about this kind of music. And you don't have to worry so much about the quality of the recordings if you mix and match any of these conductors that I'm telling you about. I mean, for example, let's go back. Let's talk for a minute about Apollo again. Yes, Karajan sucks. There's no question about that. But, I mean, you can get Esa-Pekka Salonen, and he's absolutely fabulous. Antal Dorati, he coupled Apollo, I think, with Copland's Appalachian Spring. It was gorgeous on Decca. Absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you just do very, very well with this music if you know who your Stravinsky people are. And that's why I try and do with these idealists so many different conductors, because you can go by the conductor. If they're good Stravinsky conductors, you can trust them in just about anything he wrote, and do that with confidence. And so that should guide you in making up your own list, because of course you will be giving me your ideal Stravinsky list of all 11 ballets, repeating no conductors, right? But you could do it really just from here, just by picking other things that are on these albums. In the way, it's kind of cheating. But if you want to do it, go ahead. So after The Fairy's Kiss came Jeu de Cartes, the card game. This is one of the lesser known of the ballets. I adore this piece. I have to confess, I just love it. From the very first chord. See, it's in three deals, hands, three deals. And it's a card game, and the characters on stage are all playing cards. And it really is just, you don't even have to know that. It works so well by itself. There's a very funny story about when Karajan recorded it with the Philharmonia with Walter Legg. And Walter Legg detested the piece. Hated it. Karajan probably hated it too, although he did a very good recording of it. And it really is one of those pieces that for some reason doesn't strike people as wonderful as I think it is, because it's funny. It's really amusing. The music is delicious. Each hand begins with the same theme as the cards are dealt. It's da 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 dum ba boom boom. Oh, it's just great. And and I know those of you who hate my singing, that wasn't bad. That one wasn't too bad. But really, it's really just a fantastic piece. And the one I've chosen is one that may be a surprise. Herbert Kegel. Kegel was one of those terrific East German conductors. He committed suicide. He obviously was unhappy about something, maybe the fall of communism, but he did fabulous contemporary music. He was one of those really incisive, sharp, modern music guys. And his Jeu de Cartes is really, really smart. Very, very pointed and exciting to listen to. And he actually gets the humorous bits, which for somebody who was suicidal, you wouldn't necessarily expect, but he really did a good job with it. There's a moment in the third deal here where Rossini's Barbara of Seville overture, da 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 da, sort of morphs into Beethoven's Fifth, which of course is da 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 da. They're tossing it back and forth, and that's the kind of wit that you hear in this piece. It's not ha ha funny. It's witty. It's dry, delicious, pointed humor. And nobody did it better than Stravinsky in this piece. I just love it. And this particular recording, this comes with the Ottmar Sweetner Staatskapelle Dresden Rite of Spring, which is pulverizing. It has the most insane sacrificial dance you'll ever hear. It really does. I mean, they just go nuts on it. Not terribly fast, but vicious and cruel and biting. So this is worth getting because you get the Kegel Jeu de Cartes and the Sweetner Rite of Spring, and you will have a Stravinsky disc that will just knock your socks off, guaranteed. And the pieces are so wonderfully contrasted in style. I mean, they're both obviously Stravinsky, but it could be two different planets they come from. It's just marvelous. So, after Jeu de Cartes came possibly the least well-known of all of the Stravinsky ballets, the Scènes de ballet, or ballet scenes. It's a ballet. It's just a ballet about a ballet. It's the most abstract, in a sense, of all of Stravinsky's ballets. It's written for a chamber orchestra. It's just Stravinsky. It's like, you chisel off, it's like getting a giant cheese, and you take your little cheese pick, like one of those big Parmesans, and you just sort of grab a hunk, and the hunk is scènes ballet. It's a hunk of Stravinsky. That's all you can say about it. But what you also want to say is you want to have a terrific performance. It hasn't been recorded as frequently as the others, and so I have chosen Leonard Bernstein with the Israel Philharmonic, because Bernstein was one of the all-time great Stravinsky conductors, and he was very selective in the music that he chose to perform by Stravinsky. And that's what makes this so interesting, really. There's also going to be a Bernstein-Stravinsky box coming, but this won't be in it because it's a Sony box, unless they license it. But he did do it with the Israel Phil. And these Israel Phil Stravinsky performances, what's on here? That's Firebird Suite, Symphony in 3 Movements, Petrushka, the Rite of Spring. They were really, really good. They're really fine performances. They got very little play back in the day when they came out because there was a tendency, first of all, to poo-poo the Israel Philharmonic because it was the Israel Philharmonic. I don't know. It wasn't one of the world's top ensembles, but God knows they played for Bernstein. And they're really fine performances. So the Scènes ballet in this little DG2, if you can still find it, absolutely worth having, and it comes with a very good Firebird suite and a terrific, dynamite Symphony in 3 Movements. The sonics from Mann Auditorium, they're a little bit dry, but this is Stravinsky. That's what you want. You want that sharpness, that clarity, a bit of edge to the sound. It works really well in this music, and like I said, the performance is second to none. I'm so happy that Bernstein did this work. And it's fascinating that his championship of it is really been totally unrecognized. But it should give the piece a little love. It deserves it. It really does. And after Scènes ballet came Orpheus. I adore Orpheus. Orpheus is a fascinating ballet. It really is. It has a harp. Orpheus had a harp, but Stravinsky uses it in the most abstemious possible way. Just selective notes in a descending minor scale, dum, bum, 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 with the harp. That's how you know it's Orpheus. The music is very subdued. There's one fortissimo in the entire ballet, supposedly. It's when Orpheus is torn to pieces by the Furies or the Menaids or, those supposedly flesh-eating, cannibalistic women creatures after he loses Eurydice. But it's really beautiful. This music has a cool, that's the word, a cool beauty. That's the essence of that sort of Greek neoclassical aesthetic that Stravinsky was getting at. And I really think Orpheus embodies it better than anything he did in the neoclassical realm. It is so affecting and just marvelous to listen to. And my performance of choice of Orpheus comes from Orpheus, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, conductorless, and played to a fare thee well. It's the kind of piece, this is another one of those performances. It sounds like it's playing itself. It's as if it's being composed as you're listening. You just let it wash over you. Let it flow over you. It makes you feel at peace with the universe. That's what this ballet does. Even when he's getting ripped to shreds by the Menaids or whatever they're called, it really, really has this fantastic effect. It's nirvana in sound. Really an extraordinary piece of music. So, Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, and this will be in the big Orpheus Chamber music box that's coming from Deutsche Grammophon at some point later this year. Oh, I can't wait. Oh, boy, is that going to be hot. So, finally, we've come to the end. The last great Stravinsky ballet was Agon. And by the time Stravinsky got to Agon, he had started to experiment with 12-tone writing. It was his first serial composition, and I have to say, it doesn't sound notably like squeak bloop atonal. It doesn't sound second Viennese at all. It sounds like Stravinsky. In fact, it sounds like a Stravinsky ballet. I also enjoy Agon very much. It's a terrific piece. It really is. Full of still wonderful, sparse, but fascinating instrumental combinations, very delicate use of percussion. Each dance is scored for its own kind of ensemble of instruments. And it's again, you don't need to pay any attention to what it's about. It's like looking, in a sense, at a great abstract painting. One of those, things with like squares, Mondrian, someone like that. You look at these things and the pattern is so fascinating. And just hearing it happen, hearing the interplay of rhythm and texture and harmony, and it all just, it doesn't matter if you don't know what it means. It's compelling. It's just compelling. It catches your ear, and it's ballet music, so it's all about movement, and you just get that sense of things happening, and those things are interesting things. And yes, they are abstract, interesting things, I guess, but it's a terrific piece, just a terrific piece. And the performance I chose, because also this is a disc you should have, is this thing on Naxos. This is Robert Kraft. 3 Greek ballets. And you get Apollo, and you get Orpheus, and you get Agon. So it's worth getting this Naxos disc. And you get some duplication, but that's okay. Kraft was, of course, one of the great Stravinskians, but he wasn't so good at the early stuff. He wasn't very good at the romantic Stravinsky. He was kind of boring in the romantic Stravinsky. It didn't capture his interest the way the later stuff did, but there is no better guide to later Stravinsky than Robert Kraft, especially since he was there when Stravinsky wrote a lot of it, and he really understood exactly what Stravinsky was doing. And this performance of Agon is just fantastic. You won't find a more precise, clearer, more dedicated guide to the inner workings of the piece than Robert Kraft is in this performance of Agon. This is with these are with the London Symphony and the Orchestra of St. Luke's. Agon is it the LSO? No, it's the Orchestra of St. Luke's. The other two are with the London Symphony, and the Orchestra of St. Luke's is splendid, as you know, and they do a bang-up job. So that's our ideal list, 11 ballets. And again, I want you to consider just how far we come in this range of work. From the Firebird to Agon is really an extraordinary journey, And what the music is about, what it's expressing, what it's doing, it's the best way to get a sense of that is to hear these pieces from work to work. Because what's happening is Stravinsky's musical language and syntax is evolving from one piece to the other. And so, in some respects, the best way to understand what he's about is to hear 2 or 3 of these pieces in close juxtaposition. Because it's the changes in style that give you a sense of where he's going and what he wants to say. And that's what makes them so fascinating. They really deserve to be considered as a unit. And none of them are that long. I mean, the Fairy's Kiss is 40 minutes. The Firebird is a little longer. Those are the big ones. Everything else is about half an hour or less. So you can listen to 2 of them at a time and still have time left over from something like a Brahms piano concerto, or you could put 3 Stravinsky ballets into Beethoven's Ninth. So there's no difficulty in mixing and matching these pieces and following Stravinsky's evolving progress as you go from one work to the next. And if you do that, you're going to be just dazzled by the virtuosity and the variety and just the inimitable sound of these fabulous, fabulous ballets. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Push the little button that says subscribe. I really want you to be a regular. Take care.